Commander Threx stood on the bridge of the Exarith Prime, eyes scanning the holographic display before him. A darkened stretch of space, scattered with stars, stretched endlessly into the unknown. The Dominion fleet had just completed its last successful conquest, a neighboring system, its resources now under the command of Zorith Dominion. But there was one more task to handle, one more curiosity to quell. The message came in as a distress signal from a high-ranking officer in the Dominion's intelligence division. A message no one was supposed to see. The transmission was old, the data corrupted, remnants of a communication long thought destroyed during the last Great War. But it held a warning. Threx wasn't one for superstition or tales of ghosts. The reports of vanishing scout ships near the Sol system were just anomalies. The war was over. Humans were a forgotten footnote in history, and yet the message burned with a foreboding that dug into him like an ice-cold knife. The contents were chilling. Avoid the Sol system. Do not approach Earth. Do not engage humans. They never forgive. They never forget. Threx's heart skipped a beat. His sharp, calculating mind, usually as cold as the stars around them, flickered for a moment. Humans were extinct. The last reports had been clear. The Dominion had glassed their homeworld over a century ago. Earth had burned to nothing but ashes and charred remnants in the vacuum of space. No survivors, no sign of life. So why was there a warning? And why now? He glanced toward his senior officers. Captain Zorith of the 8th Fleet raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with skepticism. A myth, Commander. It's been over 100 years. If there was any threat left, it would have shown itself by now. Are you suggesting we ignore this? Threx asked sharply, his tone flat, but the slight edge of uncertainty rippled beneath his words. He turned back to the flickering message, its text slowly resolving into legible form. Another officer, Lieutenant Skara, typed rapidly into the ship's console, trying to trace the origin of the transmission. The display flickered briefly, then stabilized. I can't get a location. It's scrambled beyond recognition. But I can tell it's coming from near Sol, Earth's coordinates. Threx's eyes narrowed. Could the message have been a trap? Some sort of remnant signal from the war? Perhaps remnants of human technology trying to draw them in. A moment of silence followed, the weight of the situation growing heavier. I want full scans of the Sol system, Threx ordered, his voice now decisive. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to argue. The fleet had conquered countless worlds, crushed rebellion after rebellion, and destroyed the remnants of the last human resistance. Yet the thought of humans, their kind, burned away and forgotten, still haunted the Dominion. Set course for Earth, Threx commanded, his fingers tapping on the control panel. We will find out the truth for ourselves. The vast expanse of space swallowed the Exarith Prime and its fleet as they traveled toward Sol. The stars around them seemed indifferent, distant, yet there was something about this stretch of void that felt wrong. The air on the bridge was thick with a sense of anticipation, heavy with the unspoken thoughts of the officers. Earth, humanity's long-forgotten cradle, loomed ever closer, but no one on board could shake the feeling that they were walking into something ancient and perhaps far more dangerous than they could comprehend. We're entering the Sol system, Commander, Lieutenant Skara announced, her voice betraying a hint of unease. She glanced at the readouts, her brow furrowing. No anomalies detected. No unusual energy signatures. Everything seems dormant. Threx stood, his towering form silhouetted against the stars. His eyes remained fixed on the display, scanning Earth's orbit, his mind racing. Silence. Everything about this felt off. The quiet was suffocating. He had expected some kind of defense. Drones, automated stations, remnants of old human technology left to guard their once proud homeworld. But there was nothing. Not even the faintest trace of life. Keep the fleet in formation, Threx ordered. His voice was calm, but inside, something gnawed at him, an instinctive unease. Let's see what we're dealing with. The ship's sensors pinged briefly as they passed the outermost planets, slipping past the gas giants and their moons. Finally, Earth came into view, a shadow of its former self. From a distance, it was a ghost, its blue oceans and green continents barely visible beneath a veil of smoke and ruin. The scars of the glassing were still present. The dark patches of burned land stretched like dark veins over the surface. The planet seemed lifeless, yet there was an unspoken weight to it. A presence. Approaching Earth orbit, Skara reported, tension creeping into her voice. There's nothing here. No ships, no satellites. Only debris. Threx stared at the planet, feeling the unexplainable pull of its emptiness. The surface was cold. Far too cold. Earth should have been radiating heat from its core. But there was none. Send out the recon probes. I want eyes on the surface, Threx ordered. The probes launched into the void, their engines firing in precise, calculated bursts. The fleet waited in tense silence. Moments passed. Then a report came in. I've lost contact with Probe Alpha, Skara said, her voice tight with anxiety. It's gone. No signal, no trace. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Something was wrong. Launch a second probe, Threx commanded, his voice steely, though inside he felt the unease spreading like wildfire. Send it deeper. I want to know what's down there. Another probe shot toward the surface, its sensors scanning as it descended through the atmosphere. The seconds felt like hours. Then, just as the probe reached its destination, the screen flashed with static before it too went dead. Nothing, Skara muttered, trying to control the tremor in her voice. There's nothing left. Earth, it's silent. Before anyone could respond, that Exarith Prime's systems suddenly flickered. A sharp, unmistakable hiss of interference filled the bridge. The consoles shorted out, and the lights dimmed. For a heartbeat, the ship was plunged into a ghostly quiet. Then, as the systems began to stabilize, one final transmission filtered through the static. A message, weak but unmistakable. Watching. The word echoed across the bridge like a whisper carried on the wind. A chill swept over the crew, each person standing frozen, as though they were suddenly aware that something was no longer out there, but was, in fact, watching them. The silence of Earth was no longer just empty space. It had become a presence, a warning. Threx's eyes narrowed. Prepare for emergency evasive maneuvers, he commanded, though he wasn't sure what threat they were even facing. The fleet waited, poised in perfect formation. But deep within, Threx felt the undeniable truth creeping over him. Earth wasn't empty. And whatever had been waiting, watching, it wasn't human anymore. The bridge of the Exarith Prime was thick with tension. The ghostly word watching hung in the air like a predator's breath, sending a chill down the spine of every officer present. Threx stood motionless, his gaze locked on the empty screen, the eerie static still crackling in the background. Earth was silent again, but its silence now felt like 1,000 unseen eyes. Waiting, watching. Commander, Lieutenant Skara's voice was strained. Sensors are picking up something, on the surface. Threx's heart skipped. What is it? Something. Moving, she said, her voice quivering with a mix of fear and disbelief. I can't get a clear reading, but there's a heat signature. A figure. It's not a machine. It's human. Threx clenched his jaw. Human. Impossible. He'd watched the destruction of their world, saw the bombardments that turned cities into molten craters. What remained on Earth was nothing but rubble. How could there be a human alive on this forsaken planet? Bring up visual on the surface, Threx ordered. The screen flickered to life, showing a desolate landscape. Cracked earth, shattered buildings. Yet in the center of a ruined city, where New York once stood, there was a lone figure. Standing still, staring into the camera. Cloaked in a black exosuit that shimmered like liquid metal, the figure looked almost alien. but the face beneath the helmet was unmistakably human. Old, weathered, but human. "He's just standing there," Skara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Doesn't he know we're here?" Threx's gaze was intense, his mind working at full capacity. This wasn't what he'd expected. An ancient soldier, perhaps, driven mad by solitude. A desperate survivor. Yet the stillness of the figure, the unsettling calm, sent a shiver of something much darker crawling up his spine. "We need to make contact," Threx ordered. "Prepare a landing team. We'll take him alive." The shuttle descended through the blackened clouds, cutting through the suffocating atmosphere of a planet long thought dead. The once blue sky now bore only shades of gray, the remnants of humanity's grand civilizations reduced to broken monuments and rusted skeletons. The shuttle door opened with a hiss, and Threx stepped out, followed by his team, armed, ready for anything. The air tasted faintly of ash, and the ground beneath their boots was dry, brittle. They moved cautiously, the city around them eerily silent. The lone figure remained standing, unmoving. When they were within 100 meters, the figure finally spoke, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "I warned you," he said. His tone was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it that sent a cold shiver through Threx's crew. "Who are you?" Threx demanded, his voice firm but laced with an underlying uncertainty. The figure's helmet glinted in the dim light as he tilted his head slightly. "Colonel Mason Rourke," he replied, his voice rasping slightly. "Commander of the Terran Black Shield. You shouldn't have come." Before Threx could respond, a brutal, searing heat lanced through the air. Rourke's suit seemed to hum, and in an instant, one of Threx's soldiers was incinerated in a flash of bright white light. The others raised their weapons, but the colonel moved so fast, so fluidly, that they didn't even see him shift. "Run!" Rourke's voice came again, this time tinged with something darker. Warning, frustration. "You were told to leave." The soldiers opened fire, but it was useless. A single, swift motion, and Rourke deflected the incoming shots with ease, his movements faster than the eye could follow. Then, with a crackling snap of energy, he vanished, disappearing into the ruins without a trace. Threx froze, his mind reeling. What was that? Before anyone could speak, a message blinked on the comms panel of the shuttle. "Tell Threx to leave now, or remember." It was the same chilling message that had haunted their thoughts since they arrived. But now, it felt real. They were not alone on Earth, not by a long shot. And whatever had been waiting, hidden beneath the planet's surface, was no longer simply observing. It was ready to fight. Threx stood frozen in the center of the ruined city, staring into the empty space where Colonel Rourke had vanished. The air around him felt heavier now, the silence deeper. The word revenge hung in his mind like a specter. His soldiers were scrambling, their faces painted with shock, fear, and confusion. Rourke's abilities were not human. No mere soldier could move like that, deflect energy blasts with his bare hands, and vanish without a trace. "Commander, we need to fall back," Lieutenant Skara said, her voice tight, almost pleading. "This is beyond anything we've ever faced." Threx's eyes narrowed. "No, we'll press forward. We came for answers." He couldn't afford to retreat now, not when they were so close. He had already been warned. They never forgive. They never forget. But who they were remained a mystery. The warnings seemed to grow stronger, more real, as if Earth itself was alive with an ancient grudge, a presence he couldn't quite understand yet. "Captain Zorath, prepare the fleet for orbital bombardment," Threx ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. His mind raced. There had to be more to this. The history of humanity was clear. They were defeated, wiped out, yet the signs spoke of something different, something alive beneath Earth's scorched surface. This wasn't some remnant of human rebellion. It was something far older, something prepared. "Bombardment, Commander." Zorath's voice carried disbelief, But he didn't question the order. What if this is some sort of trap? It's not a trap, Threx said, his voice cold. It's revenge. They made their way back to the shuttle, carefully avoiding any more of Work's traps. It was too quiet now, the kind of silence that filled you with dread, as though the city itself had turned against them. Back aboard the Exarith Prime, the crew worked frantically to analyze the data collected from the probes. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the findings became. The old archives, the ones left behind by the human survivors of the Great War, showed nothing of Work's existence. No records, no files, just empty spaces. Yet the data the fleet had gathered now painted a chilling picture. Earth had been abandoned for a reason. But what was it? The answer came in fragments, a series of ancient logs recovered from hidden military bunkers beneath the ruins of New York. As the tech team ran the data through decryption algorithms, one entry finally decoded with a single line of text. Operation Revenant initiated. If we fall, we rise again. The words were haunting, their meaning clear. The humans hadn't been wiped out. They had planned for this. The fall of Earth was only part of a greater strategy, an operation set in motion to ensure humanity's return, no matter how many centuries it took. Commander, Skara said, her voice trembling as she stared at the display. This isn't just a message. It's a directive. They never left. They've been waiting for this moment. Threx leaned in, his eyes narrowing as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. They've been building, preparing, waiting for the Dominion to think they were weak. They were never defeated. He turned to the tactical officer, his voice sharp. Find me everything on this Revenant protocol. Every file. Every mission. As the crew scrambled to comply, Threx couldn't shake the realization settling in his chest. They hadn't invaded a dead world. They had stumbled upon the birthplace of something far darker. The Revenants were not just human survivors. They were an army, built not to conquer, but to erase those who had dared to destroy them. A sudden pulse of light shot through the ship, a shockwave that rattled the hull. A moment later, a booming voice echoed through every communications channel. You were warned. Threx's eyes shot wide open. The voice wasn't from Rourke. It was coming from everywhere. It was Earth itself speaking now. The planet was alive. The ship shuddered as the shockwave reverberated through its hull, but the crew barely had time to react before the next wave of pulses began. They came faster now, each one louder, each one more intense than the last, as if Earth itself was sending a warning they couldn't ignore. Commander, something's happening to the systems. Lieutenant Skara shouted, her fingers flying over the console. We're losing control of the engines. Powers fluctuating. Before she could finish, the entire ship jolted violently, throwing the crew off balance. The lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging them into total darkness. For several heartbeats, there was nothing but the sound of emergency alarms and panicked breaths. Threx's mind raced, the chaos around him pushing him into action. Activate backup power, he ordered, his voice calm but firm. Within moments, the emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie glow over the bridge. But the ship was still reeling, drifting out of control in the vastness of space. The fleet was scattered, unable to regroup, each vessel struggling to regain full function. Status report now. Threx barked, eyes scanning the crew's panicked expressions. His voice was the only anchor in the storm. We're completely out of alignment, Commander, Skara replied, her voice tight with fear. Whatever is happening, it's coming from Earth. A pulse, an energy field. It's disrupting our systems, overriding our control. Threx clenched his fists, his thoughts racing. Earth wasn't just a dead world. It was a living, breathing force. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about something far bigger, far older. The pulse wasn't random. It was a signal, and it was designed to weaken them, to tear apart their fleet one by one. A low mechanical hum filled the bridge as the screens flickered back to life, and the crew stared in stunned silence at the new readouts. Hundreds, no, thousands, of small craft were rising from the surface of Earth, too small to be detected by their sensors at first, but now clearly visible. The crafts, sleek and silent, moved in perfect formation. As they ascended, they seemed to melt into the atmosphere itself, becoming part of the planet's grim, dark energy. The fleet had miscalculated. What they had assumed was a desolate, dead world was in fact a breeding ground for something else entirely. Impossible, Skara whispered, her eyes wide with horror. These ships, these aren't human. They're something else. Threx's breath caught in his throat. These weren't remnants of humanity. These weren't even machines. The shapes, the design, they were too alien. The hulls glistened in the faint light, organic and shifting, as though the ships themselves were alive. Suddenly, a voice rang out over the comm system. It was deep, guttural, yet unmistakably human, and it sent a cold wave of realization crashing over Threx. "We've been waiting for you." It was Rourke's voice again, this time clearer, more commanding. The tone was no longer one of warning. It was triumphant. "You see, Commander, you've walked right into our trap," Rourke continued, his voice resonating through the silence of the bridge. "What you're seeing are the revenants. We were never destroyed. We simply evolved." The fleet had been blind to it all. The deception had been centuries in the making. Humans had anticipated their fall, had planned for it. The operation wasn't to survive. It was to transform. And now, Earth was waking up. The ground beneath them rumbled, sending vibrations through the ship. In the distance, the enormous shadow of a massive structure began to rise from the ruins of the city. A colossal tower, black and twisted, spiraling upward into the atmosphere like a spire of darkness, its surface alive with shifting patterns of light. "The tower," Threx murmured under his breath. "It's a beacon." Rourke's laughter echoed through the comm. "It's a signal, Commander. A signal to them. The true inheritors of Earth. You're not fighting humans anymore. You're fighting what we've become." Suddenly, the tower's energy flared bright, sending out an intense pulse that slammed into the Exarith Prime, cracking its shields and sending a cascade of sparks through the systems. The entire ship lurched as if caught in the grip of an invisible hand. The true war had just begun. The pulse from the towering spire of Earth sent shockwaves through the fleet, the ship groaning as its shields buckled under the strain. Threx's knuckles whitened around the command chair, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and disbelief. That Exarith Prime was barely holding together, and the same fate was now befalling every ship in the fleet. One by one, their systems flickered, their engines sputtering as the pulse from Earth continued its relentless barrage. "Report," Threx demanded, his voice sharp, commanding, cutting through the chaos. "Shields at 20%, Commander," Lieutenant Skara replied, her voice trembling but steady. "We've lost communication with the rest of the fleet. Power's failing on every ship." Before she could finish, another pulse tore through the void, this one even more powerful than the last. The entire ship shuddered, the lights flickering in and out, and the screens turned to static. The hum of the ship's systems sputtered before going silent altogether. "Damn it." Threx slammed his fist into the console, his heart pounding in his chest. That Exarith Prime was dying. Slowly, relentlessly. "We need to evacuate the command deck," Skara shouted, but her words barely reached Threx over the ringing in his ears. Panic began to seep into her voice. That Exarith Prime wasn't just under attack, it was being consumed by Earth itself. Whatever Rourke had unleashed was not simply a weapon. It was a force of nature, a system-wide assault that seemed to target their every weak point. But Threx stood his ground, not moving an inch. His mind was focused, calculating. He had learned one thing in all his years of command. The first step in winning any battle was understanding your enemy. And right now, the Revenants, whatever they had become, had no intention of letting them leave. He glanced at the view screen once more, his gaze locking onto the massive, twisting tower that loomed over the ruined city. The spire seemed to pulse with energy, each beat sending waves through the atmosphere, altering the fabric of reality itself. And around it, thousands of those strange ships, those living machines, swarmed. It was clear now. The Revenants weren't just survivors of a fallen humanity. They were the evolution of it. Something far beyond the human race's initial potential, awakened by centuries of isolation and desperation. They were a force of pure will, fueled by Earth's destruction. And they would not allow their world to fall to anyone, even an empire as powerful as the Dominion. Threx clenched his teeth, fighting the urge to let panic take root. We must fight, he thought. But the battle wasn't just going to be won through firepower. No, this would be a battle of survival, a battle against a force that had transcended what they had once thought possible. "Skara," Threx said, his voice cold with resolve. "We need to cut through their defenses. We need to get to that tower. The Revenants are controlling everything from there. That's the heart of their power." Skara nodded, her fear giving way to determination. "We'll breach the atmosphere, but the ship can't hold much longer." "We'll find another way," Threx interrupted, his voice sharp with command. "Gather the landing team. We're going to take the fight directly to them. There's no other choice." Threx turned toward the forward viewports once more, watching as the Revenant's fleet continued to rise into the void, swarming like dark locusts, their movements synchronized with an almost unnatural precision. It was no longer about conquering Earth. It was about protecting it. They had evolved into something else, something lethal, but they had also made a grave mistake. They had awakened him, the true face of humanity's wrath. That Exarith Prime might be falling apart, but Threx had his orders. Never forgive, never forget. If Earth wanted to rise from its ashes, they would be forced to remember the cost of what they had wrought. That Exarith Prime groaned under another barrage, and this time, there was no denying it. The ship was falling apart. Sparks arced from the console, and the walls shuddered under the relentless assault of the Revenant's pulse. Yet, amidst the chaos, Commander Threx stood resolute, his gaze fixed on the deteriorating view screen that showed Earth's surface. The massive spire loomed in the distance, pulsating with a malevolent energy, while the swarm of living ships around it seemed to sense their every move. "We have to get down there. Now," Threx muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. His mind was calculating. Every fraction of a second mattered now. "Commander." Skara's voice broke through his thoughts. She was beside him, her face pale but focused. "We've gathered the landing team. We're ready to go, but the Exarith Prime won't last much longer. If we don't make it to the tower soon." "I know," Threx interrupted, his voice cold. "But we don't have a choice." The bridge shook again, and the emergency alarm screamed. Threx didn't flinch. He knew this was it, the moment that would decide everything. "Prepare the shuttle. Full thrusters. We're going in fast and hard. If the Revenants want to fight, they'll get one. We're going to breach their heart, and we're going to make sure they know we came for them." The team moved quickly, scrambling into position. Skara was already at the helm, her hands moving over the controls, inputting coordinates. They were all silent, their fear muted by the singular drive to survive and fight back. Each one knew what was at stake. Not just their lives, but the fate of the entire Dominion, the galaxy itself. They couldn't fail. The shuttle's engines roared to life, breaking the silence as the craft shot through the atmosphere, dodging the pulse strikes from the spire. The once glorious planet below them now looked like a dying beast, its veins of fire bleeding through the cracks of civilization. Threx's eyes were fixed ahead. His pulse quickened, but his mind remained sharp. The Revenant's swarming fleet followed them from behind, staying just out of range, as though watching their every move. Threx could feel the weight of their eyes on him, their unrelenting gaze pressing in from every angle. But there was no time to dwell on that. The shuttle descended, cutting through the thick atmosphere toward the heart of the storm. The ground loomed closer, and the jagged ruins of Earth rose up beneath them, twisted skyscrapers half buried in ash, remnants of an ancient world. At the base of the spire, a shadow grew impossibly larger, its form stretching high into the sky like a jagged claw, pulling the light out of the world. Then the shuttle jolted violently, throwing the crew to one side. The outside of the craft shimmered, the energy fields, Threx realized. They were being pulled into the spire's gravity, drawn in by the sheer power emanating from the structure. "Hold steady," Threx barked as the shuttle shook and rattled from the onslaught. Skara was struggling with the controls, trying to maintain their course. "I can't fight it, Commander," she cried, her voice strained as the shuttle's shields flickered dangerously. "We're going to be sucked in." The spire's pulse struck again, sending a surge of energy through the shuttle. The ship's systems screamed, and for a terrifying moment, the display screens went dark. Threx's breath caught in his chest. But then, as if the planet itself was mocking them, the lights flickered back on, just as the shuttle broke through the outer edge of the spire's energy field, tumbling into a void of swirling shadows. The shuttle crashed into the dark heart of the tower, its nose crumpling against the surface, sending a spray of sparks and twisted metal into the air. Threx barely had time to react before the world around him erupted into chaos. "Out, now," Threx ordered, grabbing his weapon from the compartment and racing toward the hatch. The door exploded open, revealing the dark interior of the tower. Strange, organic walls pulsed with energy, and shadows shifted within the structure, as though the tower itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the planet below. This was it, the heart of the Revenant's power. And standing at its center, in the distance, was Colonel Mason Rourke, waiting for them. His helmet gleamed under the flickering lights, his presence commanding. "You were warned," Rourke said, his voice a low growl, filled with the weight of centuries. "But you came anyway." Threx's grip tightened on his weapon, his heart pounding with fury. The real battle was about to begin. The air inside the tower felt thick, heavy, as if the very walls were alive, watching them. The hum of strange, pulsing energy reverberated through the space, disorienting and oppressive. Threx's heart raced, his breath shallow, but his eyes never wavered from the figure standing before them. Colonel Rourke. He was no longer just a soldier. He was something far worse. Something far more dangerous. The once human figure now stood surrounded by a dark aura, his armor etched with alien symbols that seemed to shift and move, as if the suit itself was alive. His eyes glowed faintly, a cold, calculating light that bore into Threx's very soul. "You've come to destroy what you do not understand." Rourke's voice echoed through the chamber, low and resonant, like the growl of some ancient beast. "But you're too late. The Revenants are already beyond you." Threx's grip tightened on his weapon, his muscles tensing for the inevitable. The Revenants had risen, evolved into something far beyond humanity. And Rourke, their leader, was their embodiment. But he was also the key. If they could stop him, they could stop the endless tide of destruction that was about to flood the galaxy. "Not if we stop you first," Threx growled, stepping forward, his eyes never leaving Rourke. The words felt like an echo from a past battle, but now they carried weight. The stakes had never been higher. "Stop me." Rourke laughed, the sound chilling. "You cannot even begin to understand what you're up against. You think you can defeat us. You think you can undo the evolution of a species that has been waiting for millennia. But you're wrong." The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the walls of the tower seemed to pulse with dark energy. From the shadows, the Revenants emerged, dozens of them, each more terrifying than the last. Their bodies were twisted, merging with technology and organic matter in a grotesque fusion that blurred the line between machine and creature. Threx raised his weapon, but Rourke's voice stopped him cold. "We are the future. We are the last species that will ever matter. The Dominion, your empire, It's nothing more than a fleeting moment in the history of the universe. You've wasted your time, your resources, your lives, trying to control what can never be controlled. Earth will rise again, and when it does, you will be nothing but a forgotten memory. As Rourke's words echoed in the chamber, the ground beneath their feet shifted violently. A massive portal opened, its swirling darkness revealing the looming figure of a massive revenant ship rising from the depths of the tower. The ship's presence was overwhelming. A living, breathing entity of nightmare, its tendrils of energy reaching out like the claws of some monstrous god. Threx's mind raced. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a war for the very future of the galaxy. The Revenants were about to become a force too powerful to stop. "Fall back," Threx shouted, his voice urgent. He had to make a choice. Fight Rourke now or destroy the source of this power before it was too late. But as he turned to give the order to retreat, Rourke's voice rang out one last time, filled with absolute certainty. "You cannot escape. We are everywhere, and we will never forget what you did to us." The ground beneath them cracked open, and the Revenants surged forward in a flood of terrifying energy. Threx's mind flashed to the words they had been given when they first arrived. They never forgive, never forget. But in that moment, something snapped inside Threx. There was no going back. He had one last shot. With a roar, he charged toward Rourke, his weapon blazing with the fury of 1,000 battles. The Revenants surged around him, but he fought with the rage of a man who had nothing left to lose. The energy in the air crackled, the battle building to its inevitable climax. Then, in the chaos of their clash, something unexpected happened. A burst of light erupted from the tower itself, and the massive ship above them faltered. For the briefest of moments, the Revenants' control slipped. The energy that had bound them to Earth wavered, and the massive machine shuddered. The tide had turned. "Now," Threx shouted, his voice hoarse. "Do it now." Skara and a landing team, hidden in the shadows, launched their final assault. They unleashed the full force of their weapons, targeting the core of the spire. Energy blasts tore into the structure, and with a final deafening explosion, the tower's dark heart collapsed. The energy that had controlled the Revenants shattered. Rourke screamed in fury as the world around him began to crumble. But it was too late. The Revenants were no more.